I want to welcome all of you to our first weekend of our vertical series, and I'm really excited about this series, and we've been praying a lot for God to use this to truly transform our lives in a way that we can experience the freedom and the joy and the contentment that the Lord really has called us to experience. And so in relation to that, we've all been watching the news, I'm sure, of the flooding in the Front Range. Flooding of what they call biblical proportions. And they don't call it a 100-year flood, but they're calling it a 1,000-year flood. And as 7 people have lost their lives, there are still over 300 people that are unaccounted for. Over 3,000 had to be evacuated. And, you know, when we think of that, the flooding, they say, has affected over 4,500 square miles. That's almost the size of the state of Connecticut. And, you know, here in the desert, we can't really comprehend the scope of the damage and the incredible loss that the people have experienced. And so when we think of that, it made me think about, we really can't truly determine what is going to happen around the corner in each of our lives. That there can be a life-altering event that can just happen in a blink of an eye. And for us to be able to handle all of the curves and the bumps and the storms of life, one of the things that we have to really understand, and I believe this is an issue that is important for us to establish as a foundation in all of our hearts as we go through this vertical series. It's an issue that is called the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And what I mean by that, I have this stool here. I'm going to put this stool here in the front. This stool is our soul. It's our heart. And on this stool, our hearts, this is what predominantly is the position that each of us have in our lives. Meaning that we are the ones that feel that we are to determine the direction, the fate, and the control of not only our lives, but our stuff. You know what I mean? And so we've been fostered or taught that you go get an education, you get a good job, you work hard, you invest, and you save, and everything that you have is for your pleasure, for your good pleasure. You have to set up your future for yourself, and so your security is dependent on you and how you manage what you have. And so we have this belief that if we have a good retirement portfolio and we have enough saved, then we have a sense of security. And if we don't, we suffer with the stress. Will I have enough? But when I see these biblical principles and I see the gospel, the reality is when we put ourselves on the throne of our hearts and we are the ones that are wanting to be in control, that, my friends, is a symptom of a deeper issue, which is called sin. What sin is that we are the ones that are trying to control and determine our fate, our future, our destiny, not God. Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And Romans 6:23 says, and the penalty of that is death, meaning separation from God. And so many of us have kind of ascribed to an American gospel that you say the prayer, you confess your sins to Jesus, and he forgives you. But we stay on the throne. We're the ones that are really the Lord of our lives and our stuff. But what God is calling us into as disciples is for us to step off of the throne. And I have this cross here to give us a picture that Jesus is calling us to allow him, by our will, to be the Lord of everything in our lives. He is the Lord of my mind. He is the Lord of my heart. He is the Lord of my family. He is the Lord of our church. And He is the Lord of my stuff, even my golf clubs. And there are times I want to freely give them back. I love this encounter that Jesus has with this guy that's a Roman centurion soldier, meaning he is in authority over 100 soldiers. And he approaches Jesus because one of his servants is sick. And as he comes to him in Matthew 8, verse 8, it says, "But the officer of the centurion said, 'Lord, I am not worthy to have you come into my house, my home. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. I know this because I am under the authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go, or come, and they come. And if I say to my slaves, do this, they do it.' And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed." This is a great picture of what I'm talking about. "And turning to those who were following him, he said, 'I tell you the truth. I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel.'" See, it was not only the faith to believe that Jesus could heal his servant from right where he was, but it was the faith of knowing that this centurion understood authority. He understood lordship, and he knew that Jesus was in authority and Lord over all things, over the heavens and the earth, and even the health of his servant. I think that that is a description of what is called stewardship. And as we lay this foundation for our vertical series, I believe that stewardship is truly the litmus test that separates a true disciple from somebody who one writer describes as just a fan of Jesus. Many of us are just fans, but we're truly not followers as disciples. And when we are able to understand this principle and then begin to live it out, oh my gosh, the freedom and the joy and the fulfillment that you can experience as you let go and walk away from these lies of the world and materialism. Look at Psalm 119, verse 33. The psalmist says, "Teach me your decrees," or your laws, "O Lord. I will keep them to the end. Give me understanding, and I will obey your instructions. I will put them into practice with all my heart. Make me walk along the path of your commands." Now look at this. "For that is where my happiness is found." You see, that's really what we're all after, isn't it? That when we look at all the commercials and materialism, it's all saying this is what's going to give you happiness. But the reality is, it's in following Jesus and understanding these directives of how to steward and manage the resources He gives us. That's where true happiness is found. You know, many pastors of churches don't teach on this subject. They're afraid to, because they don't want to offend anybody in the seats. And so they'll just avoid teaching about it. But as the pastor of this church that God's called me to lead for now, I really do believe that if we don't teach on this, I'm not really being a good pastor. Because a good shepherd is trying to teach people the principles that God has given them to help to live life successfully according to His directives. So if I knew this was going to lead you down a path that you could find peace and contentment and joy, would that be wrong for me to share it with you? And did you know this is quite interesting. When you look at the Bible, the book, the Bible, from Genesis to the end of Revelation, there are over 2,350 verses that are related to the issue of finances and stewardship, which means that 15% of the Bible is addressing the issue of finances. And so it's important to us, and it's important to God. And so the Bible is very relevant in how it teaches us how to manage and steward what God gives us. And it's interesting, the American Psychology Association did some research, and they found in the people that they surveyed that the number 2 stressor in people's lives is, what do you guess? Financial stress. Many people, the marriage pundits will say that one of the top 3 stressors in marriages that causes suffering between a husband and wife is financial stress. So in these 40 days, as we explore this spiritual journey of 40 days of generosity, I am so excited of the principles that we will learn to help us to live in the freedom and the joy and the contentment that God would want us to live within. You know, because there's so many cultural influences that are contrary to this, isn't there? You go home and you watch football, you're going to be inundated with commercials that drink this beer to make you have fun, but drive this car so that you can show the world that you've arrived. This is what you need. The problem with that is it doesn't take long for that new iPhone 5S or that QS4 to be obsolete and outdated, because they're creating another one as we speak that they're going to say you need now. And so when we follow the ways of the world, we think that to have true happiness, to have true joy, to have true contentment is to drive this car, to have this ATV, to have this boat, and to have Hawaiian shirts like Pastor Kirk. But there's the law of diminishing returns, isn't there? That the newness wears off. And it's not long till we want the next model. The whole U.S. economy is built on them teaching us that we have to have the newest and the best and the biggest. We look at this whole issue that with financing today, you can buy it now and pay later. But they don't tell us about the interest that's tacked on. They don't talk to us about that when we buy a car with interest and take out a loan, by the time you're 3 or 4 years into your payments, your loan is worth more than your car, where you get upside down. And so we're not taught, save and wait till you can afford this. And if you can't afford this, buy something of lesser value, but you can still get the functionality out of it. That's just not taught today, is it? You don't see a commercial saying, this is a great car, but if you can't afford it, buy this old junker. You just don't see it. So, I believe that in order for us to truly understand how to live a life, a vertical life where everything we see is God's, we got to get this first thing established, to realize that everything I am, everything I have is from Him, and He gives it to us, and He says, now I want you to steward it wisely and use it for your enjoyment, but also invest it in my kingdom. When we begin to do that, holy cow, does it bring incredible peace and joy in our lives. So I'm going to use a baseball analogy. I love baseball. It was the only sport I could play growing up that there was actually an advantage for being short, because the strike zone is so small. And so in baseball, the goal, of course, is to make it to first, second, third, and eventually home, and that's how you score a run, right? And so to get to first base, we got to get to first before you can even get to second. I coached T-ball with our son when he was little, and I told the guy on first base, I said, when he hits the ball, I want you to go all the way to third. So the batter hits the ball off the tee, and the kid runs over the pitcher's mound to third base. You can't do that. You got to get to first, second, and then third. So to get to first base, we have to realize this. This is so critical. This is the first thing we need to understand. Everything that we have is the Father's. Everything. Psalm 50, verse 10. I love what the psalmist is saying as God is speaking through the psalmist to us. And he says, for every beast of the forest is mine. Psalmist isn't saying it's his, it's the Lord saying it's his. The cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine, meaning his. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine, meaning his. You see what the scriptures is saying, that you know what? Everything you have is really his. It's not yours. 1 Chronicles 29, this is one of the favorite verses of Jane and myself. In verse 11, it says, yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in the heavens and the earth is yours. You see that? And he says, yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. Man, that is it right there. Everything I have and own is his, and he gives it to little old me, and he says, Kirk, I want you to steward this for my kingdom. I love what Randy Alcorn said. He said, as thunder follows lightning, giving follows grace. When God's grace touches you, you can't help but respond with generous giving. You see, when I realize that everything I have is God's, when God calls me to give it generously, I'm able to hold my things loosely and allow God to use it, to give it, and even God may choose to take it away. You know, the person that has influenced me the most in this whole area of lordship of our stuff, his stuff, is my wife, Jane. When I met Jane, she was a CPA for a big 8 accounting firm in downtown Denver. So I was a poor youth worker. And so when I met Jane, she was making about 3 times the income that I was. And she was driving this old VW. It was a sky blue VW Beetle. I called it the death trap. Because she'd be, and I was driving one time, I'm driving down I-70, and the thing just takes over, and it jumps lane on you. Because the whole front end was so messed up. I said, Jane, you got to get rid of that thing. She goes, oh, but I like my old car. She bought all of her suits that she had to wear for work because she had to look professional at Goodwill. She lived in an old house with 3 other gals, paid just a little rent. And you know what? She gave almost half of her income away to missionaries. And I said, now that's a keeper. Because I was in seminary then, and I was a poor youth worker, and when we got married, she paid my way through seminary. See, y'all going to say, see, you married her for her money. But she understood that what was important was not her possessions. What was important was serving him, and everything was for him. I loved that, and we continue to live that way. So that's first base, realizing everything we have is his. Second base is embracing our role as God's trustee to steward what he's given us. So, my car, our house, my beautiful shirts, they're all God's. And how God would use them is up to him. And if God would choose to take them away, like he did with the people during the floods there, it's up to him, not me. And I love this parable in Matthew 25 of Jesus. They call this the parable of the talents. And he says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants, okay, you got that, his servants, and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. This is a beautiful picture of what I'm talking about here. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it, listen to this, in proportion to their what? Abilities. The master knew these guys, and he knew who was going to make the most of what he gave them and who wouldn't. And then he left on this trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. This guy is clever. He's sharp. He has savvy that he's able to multiply what the master gave him because he knew it was the master's. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. And after a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. You got that? It's his money, the master's money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. If there's one thing I would love in the end, when we are all up in heaven enjoying a big sushi feast, is for you to come to me and say, the Father said, well done to me, because I did what you taught us during the vertical series. That changed my life. That would be the greatest blessing that I could ever think of. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver, I'm going to verse 4, came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. And then he ordered, Take the money from this servant and give it to the one who, with the 10 bags of silver. To those whom use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. From those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. See, I'm not teaching a prosperity gospel here, friends. Hear me out. I am not saying give God $100 and he's going to give you 1,000 back. Give God $1,000 and you're going to go in the parking lot and you're going to have a pink Cadillac. I am not saying that. But what I am saying is when we understand this principle and we live as if everything we have is God's and we give the first portion, the first fruits back to him because it's his anyway, what happens is he is able to wrap his arms around us and look in our eyes and say, well done. And because we are faithful with the little he gives us, he can give us more to steward for his kingdom. You know, there are two things we as a church corporately have jumped into that I'm just so thankful that the Lord has directed us to do this because of the abundance of fruit, of the multiplication exponentially that has happened from the little investment we've been able to give. The first one, obviously, is the South Sudan Initiative. That last year when you guys gave $104,000 to help us plant 26 churches initially in South Sudan and to pay for the trainers to go over there to do that, you know, as I talked about last week, over 13,000 new believers have come to Christ in those 26 unreached villages in South Sudan. That is amazing. I can't think of any kind of a missional effort that we could give that little money to that would produce that much fruit. I think the Lord is smiling on us because that's investing those 5 bags that we gave him, right? And then now, with the $1 that we gave to Convoy of Hope, they were able to multiply that into buying $7 worth of supplies. And that money that you gave in our One Day to Feed the World last fall is now being used to bring supplies to the flood victims in the Front Range. $1 buys $7 worth of goods. That's what God does so that his kingdom can advance. You know, I love what Martin Luther said. He said, people go through 3 conversions: the conversion of their head, their heart, and their pocketbook. Unfortunately, not all the same time. And it's maybe through this vertical process that this series we go through, your pocketbooks may become converted. And that, my friends, is where you find true peace and joy and contentment. So how do we get from second to third base? And it's this. It's not about how much we give, but what we do with what we have, either great or small. See, this is what God looks at. Because Jane and I have often said, oh man, if the Lord would just bless us with all this money, we'll be so giving. But the Lord only blesses us with what we have, and he says, just steward what I give you, whether it's great or whether it's a small amount. You know, in Jesus' day in the temple, here's what they would do. They would have this big brass like bowl, and during the offering, the people would come forward and they had the coins that were of the Roman Empire at that time, and they would open their bags and they would drop it into the basin, and the people who had lots of money, which were usually the religious guys, in those days, the pastors were the rich guys. It's all backwards now. And so they would go and open their bags, and all these coins would fall in ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. Okay? It's a Chinese bowl. Did you get it? So that's the setting of what's happening here in Mark 12. And Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts and kind of puffed out their chests, like, aren't the people impressed with what I'm giving? Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. And Jesus called his 12 disciples to him. He's like, guys, come here. Did you see that? And he says, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus. But she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. You see, Jesus saw the issue is not how much, but the issue is the heart of giving out of gratitude of the heart. And the issue is between you and God. I'm not looking at how much everyone gives every week. And I'm not on the phone saying, how come you didn't give this much? Because I know how much you make. Because I don't know how much you make. It's between you and God. But God gives some the ability to earn more. I know some guys that just have this innate ability, that they're just smart. And they know everything they touch turns to gold. You know some people like that? That they're entrepreneurial, or they know how to work in a corporation, and they know how to make that corporation grow and thrive so that they earn more. And I know people that understand that's a gift that God gave them. And so they utilize the blessings that God gives them, and they're generous to give it in the abundance that God gave them. And they find great joy and fulfillment in that. But there are some of us, like myself, everything I try to do to earn a lot of money with, it never works. And the Lord just kind of says, Kirk, what little I give you, I want you to use it and steward it for my kingdom and find contentment with where you are. You see, this is the economy of the kingdom that Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 12. He says, whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly. And give according to what you have, not what you don't have. So he's not trying to kill us. And he said, of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourselves, although sometimes he does call us to give sacrificially. Well, that's God when he does that. But he said, right now you have plenty and can help those who are in need. Later they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. You see what we gave to Convoy Hope last year? Look at what it's doing now. And Brian Kluth, the author of our 40-day journal to generosity, he says, your bank and credit card statements are theological documents. They tell who and what we worship. And so I love how clever God is. He doesn't put a ceiling down that you need to give a minimum of this amount. So no matter what we earn, we have to give that amount, like $20,000, let's say it is. Okay, some of you are thinking, there's no way I could get $20,000. Some of us only earn $20,000. So what God says is give 10% of that $20,000. Some people make $200,000, and he says give 10% of that $200,000. It works. You understand that? So when we are in a climate or a situation in our life where our income shrinks, we don't keep giving what we could give when we gave more. We give that 10%. Now, sometimes God would call to still give more, but that is something that the Holy Spirit has to prompt us to do. And we taught our kids from the very beginning, this is a biblical principle that we all live by. And so when they are given money for their birthdays, or they do a little job like watching our neighbors' cats, of all things, and they're given some money, we always say, what's 10% of that? We have them save that for the next Sunday, and they put it in the offering. What that helps us to do is we are not controlled by our stuff, and we aren't driven to obtain more stuff. We just become content with what God gives us. You know, my son Joey here, this good-looking kid sitting here in the front. He's driving down North Avenue on Monday night. He turns, and this guy comes barreling down North and hits him and totals his old beater. So I went to pick him up, and we're driving back home, and his car's being towed off, and it's totaled. And I said, Joey, are you okay? He goes, yeah, I'm a little sad, but it's just a car. And I said, you know, Joey, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. And he kind of chuckled. And so this week we're kind of looking for another car for him, and a cheap one, mind you. And he gets a call yesterday from an incredible family here. And he said, I heard Joey has lost his car, and we just are trying to buy a new car, and they're not going to give us anything for the trade-in of our minivan. Does Joey want it? I go, oh, you're going to have to talk to him. So I gave Joey the phone, and the brother says, Joey, you're probably not going to be able to pick up any chicks with this car, but you can have it. They gave it to him. I mean, it's got a lot of miles, but he's in college. He doesn't need anything. But that's what happens when we realize this principle is we can give and receive freely as God directs us. And that's where the great joy comes from. And that leads us to how do we hit a home run? By being humble to be generous. Deuteronomy 8:17 says, beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. See, this is what pride and arrogance does in materialism, is we think we're the ones that accumulated all that we have, and then we hold on to it, the vice grip, and we're stricken with fear that we're going to lose it. But he says, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods, this is the God of materialism, mind you, and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. See, this is what we get caught up into, and we get into deep indebtedness, and we're just being controlled by all the stress of creditors calling us because we can't pay off everything because we had to have what we want. And it leads to incredible distress in our lives. Brian Clue said, when a man becomes rich, either God gains a partner or the man loses his soul. Jesus said the same thing in Mark 8:36. And he said, what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? And so as even the poor are called to be giving out of what little they may have, what that does is it keeps our hearts clean, and it keeps us from holding on and allows us to let go. And that's where, my friends, we find true peace and contentment. It really is. It really is. In Genesis 28, Jacob is fleeing for his life because he betrayed his brother and tricked him into the birthright that was due to his older brother. And as he's running away and he has nothing but the shirt or the cloak on his back, he says, then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and the stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. You see, when we are on the throne, that tenth to us is ours. But when we get off of the throne and put Jesus there, what we realize is everything, not just the 10%, but all of it is his. And so he just says, give me the first fruits back to me, and then use the remaining 90% wisely and live within your means. And that's when we find true contentment. You know what I meant. So when you get your journals, your 40-day journal, and you read through those scriptures, I am praying, and you work on the worksheets that are in that booklet, that you are able to begin to change how you manage and steward the resources God gives you, either great or small, and live within your means and find the contentment that God has for you. Can I have the worship team come up, please? And there is great reward when we live our lives the way God has created us to live it with. And I'm not talking about the reward of God giving you more stuff. But what I am talking about is what God does here. It's interesting that we were having a conference call with Corey Sondrel, our regional overseer in our region for the vineyard. And I was on the phone with about 6 or 7 other vineyard pastors. And Corey said that they recently did a survey in their church in the vineyard in Canyon City. And with the questions that they asked and the answers that they got, here's a summary of some of the results that they found that I think really are fascinating to give us some empirical evidence that backs up what I'm talking about. He said that as they interviewed these people in their church, 34% of them said that they give at least 10% or more to their local church, the Vineyard. And so 46% of those said that they give less than 10% to the church, and 20% said they don't give it all to the local church. But from some of the other questions that they asked, here's what they found. And I find this quite fascinating. They said that those that scored the lowest on peace, contentment, hope, and joy in their life were those that gave under 10%. So the 66% who said they gave under 10% they said the number one stressor in their life was finances. But those that gave 10% or more, they were rated the highest on peace and joy and contentment. But they were giving away more. But you know what? They also found that they said that the number one stressor in their life wasn't finances. It was busyness, of all things. But actually not hard to believe in our busy, frantic world today, is it? Is it possible that those 34% that understood these principles and were living it out were finding that joy and peace and contentment that comes in realizing that everything we have is not ours, it's His, that they were stewarding it for His glory and His kingdom, and that they had great peace of knowing that they were investing in things for His kingdom? That's what God wants for everyone in this room. It's not about funding the church. It's about you experiencing the life that God has for you, the way He's designed it, and the way He's prescribed it in the book, the Bible. Join us, my friends, in this 40-day journey as we see how to view our things vertically and give it to God first. Let's stand, and as we worship, let's do this. Let's prayerfully realize what's the most important thing in our life as we worship Jesus.